Good afternoon, class. For today's presentation, I will be discussing attribution theory, the theory itself, its history, and its fundamentals of what makes up this theory. For those of you that already do know what attribution theory is, thumbs up, you're ahead of the game. Attribution theory is when people act the way they do in conflict. It can increase likelihood of escalating conflict. So, attribution theory history. Fritz Heider first proposed this theory back in 1958. Here's a photo of him over there. But it wasn't until Bernard Wiener who developed a theoretical framework. And here's a photo of him here. So, why do people behave in certain ways? We make assumptions about the internal state of a person and we try to explain their behaviors. Attribution theory tries to explain the ways in which we judge people differently, which depends on meaning we give to a given behavior. According to the attribution theory, we attempt to determine whether an individual's behavior is internally or externally caused. That determination basically depends on factors, distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Their behavior is caused either internally or externally. Internally caused behaviors are those behaviors believed to be controlled under the individual. Externally caused behavior is what we imagine the situation forced and what we are able to do. For example, suppose your friend comes late to work. You might attribute that he was out partying very late or oversleeping the following morning. This is an internal attribution. You think it was under his personal control if you attribute this to something unexpected, which out of his control, such as a flat tire on his way to work, or a car accident, or even traffic. You are making an external attribution. If the behavior seems unusual, it is then externally attributed. For example, it is unusual for a regular worker who is never late to be late some days. In these cases, we are likely to make an external attribution. And if a person is late almost every day to work and is someone who is not committed to anything, then we make an internal attribution. The behavior that shows consensus is when everyone is facing a similar situation, responds the same way. If consensus is high, we probably would give it an external attribution. And if the consensus is not high, we give it an internal attribution. Picture yourself at school, for example. If you're assigned homework and you don't complete it, but everyone else in your class completes the specific homework, you end up handing in nothing. Michaelberg will probably make an internal attribution. You can either listen to Michaelberg scream at you for not having your homework done, he can suggest to you that you are irresponsible and so on. On the other hand, if no one does the homework, then the teacher is forced to make an external attribution. And if we're all lucky, then Michaelberg will excuse us all from the homework. The last determining factor is consistency in a person's actions. If the behavior is consistent, we attribute internal causes. And if not, we attribute external causes. So, how do we implement attribution theory to Dylann Roof? A post from the New York Times suggested that, quote, by the time he was in high school, Mr. Roof was struggling with his classes, attending the 9th grade twice before dropping out. He floated in and out of jobs, took drugs and drank, had run-ins with the police, began reading white supremacist websites, and, in most months before the massacre, boasted off wanting to start a race war. Friends and investigators say this represents as an external attribute that may have had influence on the church shooting in Charleston. May have. Not saying it does, but it may. Dylann Roof's church shooting was the outcome from his white supremacist mindset and his belief in white supremacy and dominance over the black community. This can be argued as an external attribute, which does not only involve his personal views, but the time he spent educating himself about white supremacy, which is external, because he's using sources like the internet to educate himself in order to think the way he does. Dylann Roof's inability to finish grade 9, his failure to maintain a job, and his involvement with law enforcement in the past are relatively internal attributes that, again, may have impacted his life to perform the acts that he did in Charleston on June 17, 2015. With hard to find compellable evidence to suggest that everything that Dylann Roof did on June 17th was internal attributes. Sure, many people can argue that Dylann was mentally unstable, but it's important to note that Dylann Roof testified and told investigators that yes, he is a white nationalist, but also a white supremacist. and not mentally unstable.